This is a true crime podcast. It contains adult themes and content and may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
When a guard would stop and talk to you, you used to stand back and you would yell so people could hear what you were saying to that guard as they walked by or within the vicinity.
But he knew what a convict was going to do before they thought of it themselves. He'd just been around that long, and he was tough.
They'd find Sprocky in about every conceivable place you could imagine, which we would, of course, dump.
They'd wait until everybody was locked up, and he would open his door and run down to cell one and get a bugler can full of Sprocky and take it back to his cells.
She had a kind of a hypnotic power. There were a great many wild cats around the penitentiary, and most people couldn't get near them. But she would stand in the doorway of the cell house and say, "Kitty, kitty, kitty," and those cats would go to her.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Stool Pigeon Saturday. Today I am honored to be in the studio with Warden of ISCC, Jay Christensen, on his very last week just before retirement. And what is this, 39 years you've been an officer?
Not that long, 32 years calendar-wise. Uh-huh. My certificate that I just received at my celebration says 34 years, but the state goes by hours. So in other words, I've done 2 years worth of overtime throughout my career.
God.
So,
well, congratulations and welcome to the show. Thanks for
being
on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, can you just tell our listeners a little about yourself, where you grew up, and when you began your career in corrections? Sure. I was originally born in Iowa, and in elementary school, we relocated to Colorado. And my older brother, when he came out of the military, had a scholarship to attend BSU. So he was moving up here by himself. My mother thought that I was a little bit more street smart, coming from a small area in Colorado where city life was not very big. She wanted me to come with him. So my older brother Glenn and I moved up here together and got an apartment in Meridian. And I attended my senior year in Meridian High School. You know, I grew up on a ranch in Colorado. Some people say I'm still growing up, but I did a lot with motorcycles. I did a lot with horses. We were very involved in rodeos, and the sisters were all queened, and my younger sister was queening around here a lot after they relocated. And my father had visited us a couple times while he was up here, and they really enjoyed when they came up here and visited, and we wound up all relocating here together. You know, my interest in the past has always been in mechanics, and actually my formal education is in auto mechanics. I went to a Votech school, and shortly after I got married, my father-in-law that worked for Northrop Aviation in California recruited me to be a structural mechanic in a plant out there. And so we relocated out to California and moved in with him in Torrance. But my job assignment was actually in Compton, California. So I was the minority at the plant. I got along with everybody great. I loved the job. It was terrific. But the area was very violent. And we had a child on the way. Then I had a couple of events take place that I just didn't want to be in that area. And to include that, I was a little bit homesick for Idaho and family. So I put in my 2 weeks notice, and it was just very ironically in an area like Los Angeles, and this was actually in Torrance. I pulled into a 7-Eleven. I think I went in to get a soda or something like that, and a manager from the training facility in El Segundo, California, pulled in at the same time that recognized me from the training class. And he said that he had heard I'd put in my notice. He had come from Idaho, and as a matter of fact, he was a coordinator for the fitness activities at the ISCI in the early 70s. And he may have worked here, because I know that he was with Northrop for quite a while. He gave me a phone number that he wanted me to call when I got back here. He told me he thought I would do really good in this position. And the number actually was a phone number to Larry Wright. Oh. And Larry Wright, you pointed out his office when he was a lieutenant here at the old pen, was a warden at the South Idaho Correctional Institution at the time. So I continued to call after I got back time and time again. And
Never was able to get a hold of him, but the switchboard operator kept hearing my same voice calling, and she asked if there was something she could help me with, and that was Judy Ogawa. And Judy Ogawa had started with the department in the 60s, and she was not assigned at this facility, but she worked with the females over in Nampa area. And when they opened up the new facility out in 73, then she transferred out there. And she was the switchboard operator, and I think in your podcast with Calvin May, she was a switchboard operator that day when you called up and talked to her.
That's
Judy Ogawa. So,
what are you doing in the yard?
Which I'm still in contact with her. I think I spoke with her about 3 weeks ago.
Oh my gosh.
She's still living in Idaho. Yeah.
Oh wow.
She coached me through the application process, and back then you'd go down and you'd get an application that you'd fill out at the Hall of Mirrors downtown. I think it's the J.D. Williams building. She told me, do up a resume. She says, get a bright colored piece of paper. And she says, do you own a typewriter? And I said, no. And she says, spring for one. It looks more professional when you fill it out with a typewriter. Yeah. So that's what I did, is I bought a typewriter, and I followed all her advice. I applied. And I got hired on in the summer of '89 as they were preparing for the opening of Max. They were still building Max at that time. And like I say, I'm still friends with Judy Ogawa to this day. She was one of my mentors. Her son was also another one of my mentors. He was already working there. He was a maintenance supervisor when I started. And he also climbed through the ranks. And he became, before he retired from us, he was the deputy director for the Department of Corrections. And that's Jeff Zamuda. He is now the director for the Kansas Department of Corrections. Which I'm still in touch with him on occasion too. Yeah, they're all great friends of mine.
So you came in through automotive repair, essentially.
Yes.
How did you start working as like a correctional officer?
I think probably a lot of it is just due to my size. I'm 6'3" and strong build. So that it was natural, and grew up on a ranch, and I've always been able to handle myself. And back then, that was that was a big deal. Not so much today. It's really, and even more so back then, that people even didn't even talk about. It's how you handle yourself verbally is more important. How you speak with people, how you communicate, how you're able to evaluate situations and deal with them. But I can tell you that my auto mechanics have really helped me in corrections. The way doors open and close, the systems are all mechanical systems. They're not like your typical residential type systems. Throughout my career, I've even done some mechanical work for the department. I've done some painting of vehicles. I've done some modification of vehicles. I spent 1.5 years working as what's called the security systems foreman. That's basically the locksmith for the department. I worked on central office. I worked on the facilities south of town. And I don't know if I told you this or not, I even worked down here. There was a key lost up on the death row here, and they were unable to get into a cell. They found that out when the light burned out inside the cell. And they called out and asked if there was somebody to get into there. And so I came down, and I removed the lock. I had to use a mirror and a grinder on the inside of the cell and remove the lock from the inside. And then once I got the lock removed and out, I rekeyed it and left you guys a new key for it.
That's right.
The large Folger Adams keys. It's called a paracentric key is what it's called. Paracentric. Wow. Yeah, there's several different types of keys in prison systems. Those large brass skeleton keys. Yeah. Typically, they're either a Southern Steel or a Folger Adams. They're called paracentrics. And they have another key that's fairly large. It's more than what you see on a house, an extremely large key. That would be called a mogul key.
I feel like that would be such an asset to have a prison administrator who's worked, as a correctional officer and also knows all of this about mechanics and how doors operate, locks operate. I feel like is that pretty typical amongst?
No, it's not typical. And like I say, I think it did help me throughout my career. When a lot of things would come up that had maintenance issues in it and stuff like that, a lot of times they would consult me as I came up through the ranks. Right. Sometimes utilize me. I'll give you an example. I promoted to sergeant at the Maximum Security Institution. On my first day there, I'm walking through the units with the captain, and the captain's telling me about a problem that they're having in A block at Max, or B block. It was B block. The problem is the doors, they're sliding doors, they open, and as they close, there's a gap on each side of the door, okay? And more so on the sliding side, for the clearance between the door and so forth. And what they were doing is they were loading up like cups with urine and feces, and they called it baptismal of the staff. And so as the staff would walk by there, they would splash that crack, and they were able to occasionally hit the staff members. And I suggested to them as I was walking by, I said, you know what we could do? We could contact one of the local steel companies and just order angle iron from this distance up to this distance, and we can just weld it in place, and then they couldn't access that crack anymore. And then he said, really? And he says, how about this? Here's another problem. The doors, once you release them, they can just throw them open, and we can't do leg restraints. And I said, well, how about if we drill a hole right here in the track and carry a little garden variety hitch pin, and we just push it into the hole every time we want to put leg restraints on. So at my first day as sergeant, I was reassigned, and I spent the next couple weeks drilling holes and welding.
Wow. That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
So you've left your mark, like probably all throughout that.
Right.
Wow.
And in my retirement, one of my former colleagues that has been with the Department of Corrections over there for a very long time came over and spoke. I hadn't seen him, 15 years. Yeah. And he told me while he was here, he said he presented that idea to Oregon Department of Corrections. Oh, and he says he presented that a long time ago. They had the same problems. Oh, and he says they're finally going to bite on it.
Are you heading over to do that one too?
No, I'm not. Well, however, I must say I am very, very interested in, the state has recently developed a part-time program for retirees and for people that had left the department for other reasons, but they left on good accord. Mm-hmm. The pay is still a little bit up in the air, but there's a possibility that, if I was to apply after 90 days of retirement, they do a background test, they check to make sure I haven't gotten any trouble, since I left the department. And they can bring me back at potentially the rate of pay I would have been as an officer when I left. And I could go in and cover just some overtime needs on the weekends where the overtime needs is, the greatest. Yeah. I can't exceed 19 hours a week. I can't work on a weekend. There's some rules around it before it affects your Percy. So I'm very interested in that program. It's a way for me to, keep my toe in the water, so to speak, and stay in touch with corrections. It's such a big part of my life. It's almost becomes part of your identity.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, it does become part of your identity.
Definitely. So, yeah. And it
Yeah.
sounds like you put your life into it. Like, yeah, of course you don't want to.
Yeah, the majority of my life has been there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Going all the way back, can you talk about your training when you did become an officer?
Yeah, it's much different than what a lot of the people received here. Or,
Yeah.
I listened to your podcast with Calvin May, and he received very, very little training before they put him to work. Pretty much on the job is what he received. So when I started to work for the department, the training academy was here at the old pen. Mm-hmm. Now, my academy was the largest academy that was ever put on by the Department of Corrections, and that was in preparation for the opening of the maximum security institution. There was 125 of us when we started. So what they did is they allocated buildings out at Gowan Field. We had a 5-week academy there. And we went through all different types of training. That many of the similar training that we have today, it was named a little bit different. Maybe had a little bit different curriculum in it. There was some correspondence courses that was required that was put on by ACA. Part of that class was that while you're going through the academy, you had to complete a correspondence course with the American Correctional Association, and it was a correctional officers course. And they would test you on that on Fridays, as well as a test from what you've learned in class. And so you had to pass basically both. And then after that 5-week academy, went out and I had, I believe it was 2 weeks of on-the-job training where I worked alongside somebody else. And then after you complete that 2 weeks, they could either extend it or release you. And they released me, and then I'd start getting assigned positions.
Okay.
My first year, the bid was based on, between the other 124 people out of the academy. It was based on how well you did in the academy. And I wasn't the top scorer, but I scored high enough that I was able to get a day shift position, and I was very, very pleased about that. So,
very good. Yeah, I didn't realize that your score would determine your
and it still
as.
holds true today.
Yeah.
If you come out of an academy that has 35 people in it today, the top scorer is going to be the one that has the most seniority for the bid purposes.
Gotcha.
So that's a valuable piece.
Yeah, pays to study. Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
So what positions have you held within the Department of Corrections throughout your career?
Almost everyone.
Yeah.
So I started as a correctional officer in 1989, and that was at ISCI. Soon after, starting as a correctional officer the following year, I became part on the tactical team. There was required reading that came with the tactical team. Back then, you've heard the saying, good old boys, right? Well, I'll tell you, to get on the tactical team back then, you had to be sponsored. Somebody had to say, we want him on the team.
Yeah.
And so they would sponsor you, and the team would actually take a vote of whether they let you on the team or not. And then part of that is you had to do some required reading, and it was a book called The Tactical Edge. They still use that name in today's academy, or the Tactical Edge Award is given to the person that you most likely be beside in a touchy situation on a tier.
Yeah.
And that's the Tactical Edge Award. I'm not sure everybody knows where that name came from, but one of my former tactical team members, he came out of my academy. His name was Kerry Laughlin-Boy, who was an instructor at Post for a very long time. I'm sure he's the one that developed it, because I don't know who else who had those ties.
Yeah, you got to trust that person who's with you. I get that. Okay.
After working as a correctional officer and being on the tactical team there at ISCI, I transferred to SICI in 1994. My placement going over to SICI was with a specialty area that Larry Wright had developed, and it was called Special Projects. And this Special Projects, what they did is they contracted out offender labor for a profit. And they would contract them out to city, state, and federal agencies. A staff member would supervise a crew and go out. And my first year was spent as a trail crew officer, where I'd put a backpack on and we'd hike into the mountains for 10 days at a time. Most of the time I was out of radio contact. And we'd go in for 10 days at a time, we'd camp out, and we'd work on trails that entire time.
Did you kind of bond with the prisoners that you were
It's really a different setting. That might have been, one of the pivotal points in my career, because I was able to see transformations in a lot of the offenders while we were out there. A lot of them had never worked before. My position was basically to supervise them. And a lot of them, they'd be handling hand tools, and they get blisters on their hand, and they're not used to handling tools, and they never had a job, because dealing drugs is not a job, and first couple of days they might be wanting to quit. They're trying to figure out every excuse to get out of work, and you just continue pushing them and mentoring them. And I found one of the best ways to do it is to do it myself, pick up a tool and do it myself. Yeah. And then a lot of those guys that I talk about that were wanting to quit, at the very beginning, at the end of the 10 days, they'd be the last one to leave the work site. They'd be standing there over their shovel, admiring the bridge they built and proud of themselves. And a lot of times that was the first time, you were able to see them proud of something they had accomplished. And so it was a very, very good experience for me to see that. I've worked fire lines with the inmates. There was a lot of times where I actually had to put trust in the inmates that had more experience with fires than I did, that we were doing it correctly. I had to sometimes follow their lead, and some of the inmates were actually designated as crew leaders. They'd call the shots of when to bail or when to throw more dirt. I worked right alongside with them. I'd cut line with them. I'd throw dirt with them, fight the fire with them. And I think it garnered me a lot of respect that I didn't just stand back and watch them do it. So
that program, that was recently kind of ended temporarily, or
it was slowed down. It's been widely used, not only just in the state of Idaho, but nationally. We had one incident down in Utah where a bad player got outside of his camp and made some news. And so it brought attention to the program, and it's put a damper on it, that's for sure. But there is still special projects going out on different crews. I don't know as if we've had a whole lot of contributions since then for firefighting.
Right.
But I'm sure it'll be returning. Yeah, you can't let the actions of one person, dictate, what happens to thousands in the future.
Are they still cutting trails and doing things like that? What kind of
I'm not sure if they've got trail. There may be some trail crews coming out of the institution up in Orfino.
Okay.
The trail crew was actually funded by Off-Road Stickers when I was doing that. I do know that there is a lot of trail work going on. I don't know as if we have any contracts on that or not. There's been talks about getting back into it from here, but it's quite possible.
Yeah.
After I came out of projects, it was that Jeff Samuda I was mentioning earlier. I believe he may have been a deputy warden or an associate warden at that point.
Okay.
We had a vacancy in what's called the security systems foreman's position. And that security systems foreman position, he knew I had a mechanical background, and he asked me if I'd be interested in going into that. Offered me a little bump in pay to go into that, and so I went into that, and much to my surprise, I was a natural, and creating locks, mastering locks, and so forth like that. It's really math. There's a lot of math involved, and it all just seemed to make sense to me, and everything just fit into place. A lot of the locking systems at ISCI were very mechanical. They were purchased from a facility in Texas that was never built and retrofitted to fit into ISCI, and they required a lot of maintenance and repairs to take place in there. And I spent a lot of time working on what they called the lock lines. So, yeah, I got to know those pretty well. Yeah. They've since been replaced.
Okay, I was going to say.
So, after my time as locksmith, my heart really was back in security. Mm-hmm. There was a corporal position open, and I tested for corporal and for sergeant. And all along I had been testing for corporal and sergeant. A corporal position was offered to me at SICI, where I would be the operations corporal for the special projects area. And I went there back to special projects, where I wasn't actually going out with the crews. I was managing the crews that went out. And shortly after that, I was offered a position as sergeant at the Maximum Security Institution, and I accepted that and moved over there.
Well, how was that transition from going to this kind of minimum to max?
It was pretty extreme back then.
Yeah.
And back then, we were going through a major change in the inmate culture at that time. I'll tell you, when I made sergeant, you had to be in the top 5 in order to be offered a position.
Yeah.
Well, they had 2 positions open over there. I was number 19. And the only reason why I was offered a position, that's how many people turned down the job to go to max before they got to me.
Yeah, what was this culture like?
Well, it was kind of the beginning of the security threat group culture. We had the introduction of the Aryan Knights about that time. Mm-hmm. I promoted to lieutenant there at max. Later on transferred to ISCI, and then I later became an emergency coordinator for the department. I actually spent time all over the state training people in emergency preparedness. Yeah. And then after that, after about a year and a half of that, I made deputy warden at the Maximum Security Institution. I transferred to ISCI later on as deputy warden. I spent the majority of my time as a deputy warden at the minimum custody facility at SICI. Okay. A year after the transition at ISCC, where it went from private facility to state facility, the deputy warden over there had retired, and the warden asked me to come over as his deputy warden of security. And so that's when I made my move to ISCC. When the warden, Randy Blades, he had promoted into the deputy chief position, that's when I applied for warden, and I got that warden's position.
Wow. So that's about 2018?
Somewhere, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I actually, in 2017, I was acting warden when he had left, and I was in that position when I was selected.
What a career. Oh
my
gosh.
Yeah. It sounds like I can't hold a job because I've been all over the place.
Is that fairly common to kind of jump from one institution to another?
There's some people, I've got another colleague that's retiring right now that is a sergeant at ISCI. And he's got 20-some years there. He started there, and he's been there his entire career.
Wow. Okay.
There's another warden that's retiring with me on the exact same day, and he's a lot like myself. He's been around, multiple different places. I always encourage staff to move around because it's my belief that it keeps the job young. Mm. But there's some people that just prefer to stay in the same place. Calvin May was at ISCI when he started. He was at ISCI when he retired. He never moved, never had an interest in moving. And I believe he had 36 years. Yeah.
Calvin May, you can check out, I did a Stool Pigeon Saturday with him during our Disturbing Justice season. He was the officer who was held hostage during the 1980 disturbance at Idaho Department of Corrections. So
just a wonderful human being. Anybody that knows him is very privileged just to know him.
He is such an amazing man, yeah.
I saw another one of your podcasts that talked about the disturbance from 1973 here, and as described by some of the staff, Ralph Elston being one of them, Milton Edgerton,
yeah.
Dan Mahoney. Dan Mahoney was my captain when I started.
Wow.
Ralph Elston, I got a little story about, and I'm sure he's probably not around anymore, but I can remember he was one of the ones that on my OJT was walking me around the fence line, and he pointed up to that tower, and he says, that officer up there was taken hostage in 1980. I don't know why they put him in a tower. He'd never shoot if there was an escape. A couple weeks later, there was an escape. And the closest tower to the escape did not catch it. However, that tower that had Calvin May in it did. So we had 3 guys escape out the front of ISCI, and I believe Calvin shot 9 times and hit one of them in one of those shots. And it was 300 yards in the dark, running, shooting with open sights. The other 2 gave up at that point.
Probably good reason to.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I don't believe we've had an escape attempt at ISCI since that day.
That's amazing. Have there been any escapes since you've worked there outside of any of the other prisons?
Well, there has been what they
say.
talk about walkaways, and some of them have been escapes from the minimum custody facilities, not from the medium. There has been some from the maximum. I've gone out and trekked on foot, walking through the canyons and looking for people. During my special projects time, there was one that walked away from a work crew, not my work crew, but a different work crew. That was, I believe, in 1995. And as I was a deputy warden at the minimum custody facility at SICI, we had one that walked away from a correctional industries work crew working on the public safety building over in Nampa. He was later recaptured in Meridian. My investigation sergeant came in and told me, well, at least we've got a perfect record now. Nobody's gotten away. And I said, no, that's not true. I remember one from when I was an officer that's never been caught. And she goes, well, I've always been told there's never been one that's got away. And I said, yeah, there's one that's got away. Yeah. And she goes, well, who would that be? And I had to think a little bit. And the guy's name was Timothy Dove. He had walked away from a work crew up in Idaho City. And she came back into my office later on that day, and she says, you're right, he is escaped. And I found the warrant for him on Ada County, but it's never been entered into NCIC. And so that was overlooked all those years. So she contacted Ada County, and they said, you're correct, it was never entered into NCIC. So I contacted the fugitive recovery team. It wasn't but 3 days they had him back in custody. He was living out of a teepee in some Mideastern state, and he had just changed his birth date by 1 year. But he was pretty identifiable. He was missing one finger. And they brought him back here. I wrote the DOR, many, many years later, because I was the only one that actually was working there at the time. And he was served his DOR. I don't think he served any additional time for that after he came back. I think they released him not too long after that. He was in originally for just insufficient funds, which was common back then. And it's not now. That's not the case anymore. But he was simply in for insufficient funds. He was really not a prison type of guy anyway, So he was not really a harm to the public, and I'm sure it was seen that way. So,
did you have any really tense moments, dangerous moments while you were an officer? Or?
It must have been about 91. I was a correctional officer in Pendine. That's the cafeteria out there. And I was a correctional officer in Pendine for a couple of years, and you oversee the feeding and everything in there. One evening, the inmates were extremely rambunctious. There were some things being thrown. You could tell that there was just a lot of heat taking place. So myself and another officer moved to the outside front porch of Pendine to get out of there. And while we were in there, I could hear a couple of the inmates talking about how they should just come out and overpower us. I have no idea why I did it, but maybe I was just young and maybe pride a little bit, but I walked right back inside and grabbed those 2 guys by the collars, brought them out and put them on the wall to restrain them. Yeah. The shift commander did order it the towers go to port arms when that was taking place. That disturbance continued, throughout the night. That went on for 20 hours. I believe we did 20-some cell extractions that night and before we brought it back under control. So the intel that came out is that it was a planned disruption to draw our attention off so they could assault some sex offenders down in one of the units. Gotcha. So, wow. That was a pretty tense moment. We've had, since I've been an administrator, we've had several other very tense moments like that. You probably heard of the recent H Block incident. Yeah. We had that. We've had a few years ago. We had an STG violence outbreak in one of the neighboring facilities, and it finally spread over to our facility as well. Yeah. There's been some violent attacks, in my time. We had one officer that he was attacked by an offender, and a razor was used on him, and his throat was cut, and we actually had to airlift him out of the recreation yard at maximum security institution. We've had some serious assaults on staff over time. And thankfully, knock on wood, that we've never lost an officer in the line of duty. And as far as I know, we are the only state that has never lost an officer in the line of duty.
Yeah, even here, there were no deaths. There were assaults, but no deaths. So
a lot of the staff that came from this facility, like those names I was giving you, I knew all them. Uh-huh. My first supervisor was Ralph Griffith. Uh-huh. I think most of the old pen stories you would hear either had one of 2 names in it. It either had Ralph Griffith or it had Joe Munch in it. Those were the two typical stories you would always hear. Yeah. But Ralph Griffith was my first supervisor. He's no longer with us. He spent a lot of time. He was pretty close with a man named Everett Atkins. Everett Atkins also came from here. He was known as one of the tower officers, always a tower officer. Everett Atkins was a great man. Ralph Griffith was difficult to work for. I'll put it to you that way.
Was he just hard on you, or
he had a very unique way of expressing his orders?
Gotcha.
and they had a good amount of volume behind them. We always found it very ironic that he could yell and scream and cuss orders at you, and then without blinking an eye, fall asleep.
Oh, wow. That reminds me, Joe Munch. You mentioned Joe. Did you interact with him very often? Or?
I did not. He wasn't working for the department when I started. He had already moved to Ada County. Yeah. I did know him. Uh-huh. I had run into him several times in the public, and even funny story, sleeping again. Yeah, there was a place in Meridian, out on Meridian Road in Victory. And one of my friends had some cars there for sale and a lot out behind this barn, and that was one of Joe Munch's favorite places to park watch for speeders. Well, he'd doze off occasionally, and one day I walked up beside his car while he was asleep there, and I tapped on his window, and he wasn't waking up. So I stood there and make sure he was breathing and everything, and make sure he was just asleep, and I went ahead and left.
Wow.
One of the stories that I used to hear about Joe Munch when I started there is that he didn't like that we had fences at ISCI. He liked the walls here. Yeah. And it has, that Constantine wire on the top, and he talked about, that's not going to slow anybody down. Uh-huh. Before long, there was a pool going, can you really get over that fence or not? Joe Munch demonstrated that he'd get over both fences in a matter of just seconds, and he did that in front of everybody.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. That's the story. It probably grew out of control over the years.
Yeah.
He probably got down on the other side and was all sliced up from the Constantine wire and stuff. But dogs were probably barking. All the towers were watching, and an escape would not really have taken place.
Right.
But the story is, he got over in a matter of seconds.
Wow. So many.
Correctional stories are a lot like fishing stories. They grow over the years. Yeah. The story I used to hear about Ralph Griffith down here is that there were several inmates that had tunneled out of here. Uh-huh. And he had figured it out that they were tunneling out. And he decided, rather than catch them in the act tunneling and pull them backwards, that he would stand where they were coming out. And that's the story is, that they uncovered the ground to look up at Sergeant Griffith with a shotgun in his hand.
That's great. Yeah, I've heard a couple like that. Yeah.
He had a nickname, Bulldog. It's because he looked like a human bulldog.
Oh my gosh, I need to track down a photo of him. That's
Yeah,
good.
yeah. Hey, if you ever find a photo of Ralph Griffith, you'll see why he was called Bulldog. He actually was a good guy. You just had to get past the way he supervised. You know, he knew prison culture. He was well respected.
Yeah.
And when he issued your orders, you followed him.
Yeah,
you know,
that was it.
don't
Yeah.
question him. You just follow him.
Can you just talk about this prison culture and the transition that you kind of experienced and witnessed?
Yeah, that's something I would like to speak about. You know, I think the staff culture has made a transformation over the years, much for the better. And I'll give you an example. Early on in my career as an officer, I had a supervisor that was experiencing some mental health issues. And he shared with me that he had ideations of assassinating the ship commander. And he shared with me his exact plan on how he's going to do it. I mean, he had the cost of the ammunition down to a T. He gave me time frames. It involved executing a couple of staff members. And I brought this information forward. And I can tell you that I was completely vilified back then by other staff for that. Yeah. Back then, the culture of a lot of the staff was to follow the culture of the inmates, you know, where they say snitches get stitches and don't be a rat, you know. And so I found out afterwards that many of the staff had knowledge that he had these ideations, but they didn't bring it forward because they didn't want to be what they considered to be a rat. Right. And that's following a lot of the inmate culture that they did. You know, fortunately, people that were like that didn't last in this career a long time, you know. So I can remember specifically the two people that were part of his plot to assassinate. They were appreciative of me bringing it forward.
Oh, yeah.
There's another staff member, and I don't know if he was sergeant or officer back then, but he was actually related to the person that told me this story. And he contacted me and told me I did the right thing.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the first contact I had had with him. And we are still very close friends today. As a matter of fact, I just spent time with him last week.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he retired as a deputy warden.
Okay.
And he's still local here. I think he went back to work doing some work for the state.
Okay.
Or his contracts work for the state.
Yeah.
So now today, that would not be a vilified type situation. You know, he had this information. It had to come forward. I'll tell you another one that came forward and thanked me for that was actually the person. He said he knew the thoughts were wrong. He had to get them out of his head. We did actually vocationally rehabilitate him, and he put him into a different type of career. Yeah. But he was suffering some mental health issues, and he knew what he was thinking was wrong, and he was afraid that he'd actually act out on it.
Yeah.
Now today, nobody would question that being the right decision to do. Right. And I'm looking back, and I don't think I ever questioned bringing it forward. But everybody else did. They saw it as being wrong, you know. So, you know, that's just an example of how a lot of the culture has changed with the staff. The staff that you would experience back then that were, as you know, badge heavy, very common, very rare today. I've actually had supervisors order me to kick an inmate's ass. I just do my own translation and restrain them and take them to segregation. But you know, those type of orders would not be issued today. The workforce is different today. You know, some of our top-notch staff are, you know, they look nothing like me. You know, I've got females that work for me that are, you know, a buck soaking wet. You know, some of our top staff. You know. Yeah. Some of our best communicators, you know, and
that's so important.
Multitaskers, and there's so much diversity and so much talent out there now. Our biggest problem with the staff right now, I would say, is bridging that gap between administration and the staff. Is communication. Yeah. The avenues that we have to communicate with them is email, and we have. I use SharePoint pretty heavy. It's almost like a Facebook for work. Yeah. And we can do Zoom shift briefings. I did one last week, and I'll be doing another one tonight. You know, where they all log in and talk to them over a computer. A lot of things like that. But really, really what they want, what they desire, what they really need is face-to-face. And unfortunately, in a facility that has 2 different cards and 2 different shifts and over 300 employees, I just can't make it to all of them.
Right.
But that's almost their expectation, is that that's what they get, that face-to-face. So the best way really that we've got to be able to get that done is just make sure that communication goes all the way down to the ranks, so that supervisor they are seeing is able to give that communication to that they desire. Yeah. There's always that gap, is what information are they wanting, what information do they need, what information can we give them, and how do we deliver that to them. Yeah. When I was an officer, we didn't, the only communication I wanted was, what do you want me to do? Yeah. And then I'd go do that. Yeah. But it's really a different workforce today than it was back then. Yeah. There are some people that are much better at communicating the needs of the workforce out there than personally I am used to myself. Yeah. And I recognize that. I recognize that's one of my weaknesses. And in a sense, I'm a little bit like Ralph Griffith. I give it an order, I just want it to be followed.
Right.
I don't want to have to explain my reasons behind the order and the feelings that were invoked in order to give the order. So that's the new generation of our workforce. But in that generation of the workforce, many of them are out there because they want to do something good for society. And that's not so much what I used to see in the past. In the past, it's a job, and back then we weren't ashamed to be called prison guards,
right?
We were going through a transition when I started. They didn't want to be viewed as prison guards by the community. They wanted to be viewed as correctional officers. And one of the transitions we were going through is getting away from the old uniform that looked like a turnkey uniform to a uniform that resembled so much of what the city of Boise police wore. And that's what I wore for many years, was that the blue polyester pants and the uniform, the shirt, Class A's and Class B's. Yeah. And I thought they were a very professional looking uniform. I was always proud to wear it. Now we're into more relaxed, a lot like what I'm wearing right now, except tan BDUs and just a polo shirt. And it's more into more of a relaxed environment now, which I think is, as they put it, softer with the offenders. So. But identifiable.
In 2021, the Idaho State Historical Society is celebrating 140 years of service to Idahoans as the trusted source in protecting Idaho's historical places and artifacts and sharing its stories. As a part of the commemoration, the Old Idaho Penitentiary is committed to bringing you 140 unique stories about the people who worked, lived, and served time at the site through this podcast and the events and programs scheduled throughout the year. The Capturing 140 storytelling program offers a unique glimpse at lives filled with hope and despair and the enduring triumphs and tragedies at Idaho's only penitentiary from 1872 to 1973. Stay tuned.
With the inmate culture, personally, I believe it's gone the other direction. I believe it's gotten worse. When I started, security threat groups were not really a big thing. You had the Brotherhood, which was pretty much Aryans, white people. Yeah. You had the Hispanics, and they did have a little bit. Some of them were considered their South Side or North Side or Serenos, Nortenos. Yeah. But they always had a truce while they were in. They were just all one group. Yeah. Even the North American Indian League, NAIL is what they called it. They had their own group, and it really wasn't gangs. It was their groups. It was their people. Mm-hmm. It's who they sit with. It's who they run with. And I don't know. I'd almost call it clubs more than I'd call it gangs back then. Respect was a very, very big thing back then. You want respect, give respect. You want to get respect, give respect. With offenders and staff alike. Back and forth. Yeah. Do your own time was very big. Yeah. Very big. Almost unheard of now. And I would say that a lot of that started changing. I mentioned it a little while ago. About the time I transferred over to Max. We had an inmate named Brett Barron that had real violent history with the department. We sent him to Arizona on an exchange program to just get him out of here. And while he was in Arizona, there was a big disturbance down there that he partook in a big portion of that. Then Arizona didn't want no part of him anymore and sent him back to us. When he came back, he brought with him the Aryan Knights. And the Aryan Knights is probably to this day probably one of the still most violent groups that we have. In one of our facilities, originating in one of our facilities, was another group called the Severely Violent Criminals. That is another group that is one of the most violent groups that we have. And we do now have that clear separation from the 13s and 14s, or the Serenos and Nortenos. And being an Aryan Knight, you have to earn your bones or earn your letters, and that typically comes with assaulting somebody that they pick. Most of the assaults that take place now with the security threat groups are within their own groups for failure to do the work, cleaning up their own crew, something along that line. Yeah. Very rarely do they cross lines. It happens once in a while, but it's pretty much the violence is within their own group. Yeah. And it's about enforcing the rules or not putting in enough work or bringing enough money forward from their drug trafficking or so forth. I don't see that as a departmental problem by itself. There's only so much I, as an administrator, can do to hold those guys accountable, to separate them, to do something about that issue. I consider it a community problem. Yeah. Even though it's happening inside the facility, I'll give you an example. One thing that I have seen change for the better over the years is in 2003 they enacted the Prison Rape Elimination Act. Prior to that, it was just considered the norm. If you're going to go in prison, you're probably going to get raped. Unless you're stronger than everybody else, right. Yeah. And law enforcement, corrections, everybody just saw it as, it happens.
It's part of it, yeah.
It's part of the prison experience.
Right.
And it should not be. Since the Prison Rape Elimination Act, there's standards that have been set. There's been protocols that have been put in place. There's required prosecution for those that perpetrate of sexual violence against another person in a correctional facility. And everyone has, guidelines they have to follow with that. Yeah. And it has really brought that to the forefront that, no, it's not part of the normal culture now. It's the same thing with violence. The violence, if you were in Ada County, if an inmate's in Ada County and he gets a fight in there, they'll charge him. If you and I get in a fight downtown on Main and 8th Street, they'll charge us. Right. We'll get arrested. We'll be taken to Ada County. Out there, they lose their TV. It's not prosecuted. Yeah. It's tolerated. Right now, prison violence, gang activity is viewed as the norm, just like PREA was prior to 2003. Yeah. I foresee that having to change in order to affect culture and change, not just in Idaho, in America. Mm-hmm. That we need to take accountability and not turn a blind eye to it. Yeah. I can say that recently, in the last couple of years, the FBI has utilized RICO for some STG groups. And I can tell you, when those indictments came down, I think there was like 20-some of them. I don't know if you remember that happening. Yeah. When that happened, it was like dead calm at the facilities for a while. It really was. Yeah. It made all the difference in the world. Uh-huh. But as time goes by, it's forgotten about a little bit, and they think, that they're continuing to get away with that. Yeah. There's always the possibility FBI could come back with some more. I think that America needs to take a strong look at that. And should we tolerate these things happening in a correctional facility? We do not tolerate it happening in our communities. Right. So, but along with that, I do want to add that there is many, many, many more residents out there that do not want to be part of that. Yeah. They want the good things that we come up with. They want to participate in the debate club. We bring somebody in from Boise State to help with that. Creative writing classes. Mm-hmm. American Legion post. Uh-huh. I used to give orientation to new offenders coming into the facility. Now we use an offender mentor group that speaks to them as they come in. and they help guide them through, steer them clear from the bad waters, give them good advice. They do their own presentation, invite them in for coffee to do this presentation. They're heavily vetted guys, and they're ones that have been extremely successful. And like I say, they're part of this group that do not want to be part of that bad culture. The majority of the offenders out there do not want to be part of the bad culture. Yeah. But the problem is that bad culture is what's got us staying busy in a reactionary mode all the time, and it makes it more difficult for us to bring these good things forward.
Right.
Do you understand that?
Absolutely.
It's like 90% of the problems occupy 90% of our time, and we got to find ways to increase the good and do away with the bad. So
I toured ISCC I think in March this year, and saw the murals that were painted along an E block. Was that a program that you kind of fostered? Or?
I think Randy Blades is the one that approved that first. Yeah. I did get involved with it. I'm from Camas County, and right there at E block, and you can actually even Google Jay Christensen ISCC, and you'll find a article in the Weekly Beaver. That's our local paper, written by Marshall Ralph. It has pictures of that mural that are actually parts of Fairfield. And the building that's right there that looks like an old. When it went into Facebook and that paper and stuff, started getting comments. I took piano lessons there when I was a child and things like that. So those are all pictures that have either been provided by staff from different parts of the country or taken off the internet. The other wing has national parks in it. If you go out into the foyer where a lot of the offenders would wait while they are going to parole hearings, you'll see the Boise train station there. Typically in the past, you'd see bald eagles or, a bear or something along that line. The idea behind that is these are all things to look forward to being able to see as part of your future.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are so beautifully done.
They are.
Just reminded me of the murals that were painted out here by prisoners.
And
everything else.
We've had, I think, one vandalism situation in 7 years?
Wow.
That has occurred on those 6 years.
Yeah.
That's occurred on them.
Well respected. Yeah.
And it was repaired, but they do. They respect it. I know they had a graffiti problem in Los Angeles for a long time, and what they started doing is hiring local artists to paint over the top of them, and it stopped it.
Yeah,
in certain areas.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's like up at Table Rock. We manage those grounds, and they were getting tagged all the time, and so we actually hired local graffiti artists to paint murals on the sides of these buildings of iconic Boise, locations. So it's prevented it because people respect that and.
Freak Alley here in Boise is one of the most visited areas.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's second to the BSU Blue.
Sector 17. It's great.
Yeah.
Kind of going back, I just wanted to talk about the transgender population within IDOC. And we were just talking about kind of the sex assaults and things like that. Is there any different way that you treat members of the population that are trans? Or
there are some steps that are good quality steps to take that we do our best to remain neutral in how we address them, and a lot of times out of respect for their situation, we let them shower at a different time during the day. A lot of times during the count time. We are dealing with commissary issues, and I believe probably within a week or two, everything that's offered on the female side will be offered on the male side as well. So the commissary will be gender neutral as well.
Okay.
And if a guy wants to order a flat iron, he can get a flat iron. Still, right now to this date, that if they are original gender that they're born with is how they are placed in the department. Yeah. There are some states that have 4 different sexes that would be male to female, female to male and female.
Okay.
But we go by their original gender. We did have one a couple years ago that went through gender confirmation surgery, and when he went through that, became a female and was moved to Pocatello. So that's still something that's evolving every day.
Right.
And that the adjectives that the staff uses sometimes, we're in a male facility and we say, hey guys,
Right, yeah.
and it winds up offending some. And so we try to encourage to be as gender neutral as possible all the time, because I don't know as if it's more common now or just more accepted now and more prevalent. So back then I think maybe it was hidden a lot more. Another thing I got to say is that it's not just in the offender population. We have it in the staff. We have it in the community. We have it in our schools. I went through a course called Certified Public Manager, and I remember a specific class where they were talking about employment rights, and he talked about the different classes that you have to be careful with discrimination, and when he came across on sexual preference. He said that is not considered one of the protected classes, but you should treat it as one. It's eventually going to be there. And I believe the city of Boise has enacted some laws to protect that class as well. I don't think it's statewide yet, but that was a very smart statement, I think, and so that's something I've always tried to follow. Is to consider it a protected class.
Just interesting how things going on in the bigger community kind of reflect.
I've got to say, I've got personal friends that are in that category as well. So, and people that I've worked with for a very long time, and like I say, they're friends of mine. So.
Nice. So, you're not the only person in your family that works for the department. You have a son who's a parole officer, District 4, probation and parole, and you said a nephew that also works within corrections. What's it like, Thanksgiving Day? Do you discuss your work, or do you have a work relationship with your family members? Do you discuss
so my son, the only thing he's known his father as doing is being in corrections. When he was in BSU, he got a job at the state capitol being security guard. And then when he became involved with his current wife, he needed to get a more serious job. And that was during a time that our staffing levels were really good, and it was like one of the only times that we didn't even have openings for correctional officers. But they were opening the Correctional Alternative Placement Program south of town. That Correctional Alternative Placement Program was being opened up by largely retired staff that I was friends with. And so I knew a lot of them, and I said, hey, Nicholas, you should apply out there. I know all these guys, and they'd be great to work for. And so that's what he did. And he actually advanced through his career there up to sergeant. And then when we did the transition from ISCC to from private to state, they put out announcements, what they call open competitive, where anybody could apply for any rank from the outside. And he applied as a sergeant to work for the state, and they actually brought him on fairly early. And he was more of the transition than I was. He actually wrote all the post orders and field memorandums for that correctional facility during the transition time. Then after I started as the deputy warden over there, the personnel determined that it was a conflict of interest for me to be in the same facility as my son. And so he sought a change, and he went to probation and parole. And he's been very pleased with that. He does a lot of instruction at post. He's ARCON instruction with his self-defense, and arrest techniques and control. That's what ARCON stands for. So he's an ARCON instructor, and he actually travels the state to teach ARCON.
Is he built like you too?
He's a little bit shorter than me, but he's always been very physically fit and handles himself really well. He's more of a communicator than a physical person. He's the softer side of me. He probably gets it from his mother more than me.
That's great. Nice.
Yeah. And then there was a Thanksgiving. My niece had brought her boyfriend, and I started talking to him. He was working for, I believe it's called Canada Security, where I recruited him to come to work for the department, took him out to the facility and toured him through the facility, and he applied, and he's been to work. He's still working, and I've lost track. I think he's back at ISCI, but was at IMSI for a little while. But his name is Dane Circle.
Nice.
So he's still with the department. In 2010, I did go through a divorce, and little less than a year, I started dating somebody that that I fell in love with, and I'm actually engaged to her. We were supposed to be married last year in Italy. Everybody knows what happens there.
Yeah.
And so, maybe Vegas here in a couple months or so.
Well, congratulations.
Well, thank you.
That's great.
She had a son that was working as a doorman or bouncer at downtown, and I'd watch him get ready for work where he'd press his pants and everything, and I'm thinking, man, he'd make a great officer, know?
Yeah.
And then when I found out how much they were paying him down there, I thought, hey, he should come to work for us. And he went to work for us out there, and he did a terrific job. He's just a solid floor staff member, but he recently left because they had a child, and he's now a stay-at-home father.
Good
Well,
for him,
and the wife earns the bacon for the family now. She's a nurse, and so she has plenty of work,
Jeez.
So my fiance is a teacher.
Okay.
So I come from a family of essential workers,
Yeah.
During COVID, none of our work hasn't changed much, Now for her as a teacher, it has. A lot of her classes last year were remote, Not this year. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I've had a lot of family in it, and you'll find that that's the case. I believe we've got a third generation Hammer out there right now.
Huh?
I started with Ralph Hammer. His son was Brian Hammer, and I believe Brian's son is working for us out there at one of the facilities now.
Yeah.
So and that's not out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
We have several staff that have generations in the facility. One of the staff that worked for me, his name is Ward. He said he has had a relative that worked here.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. We actually interviewed him on this podcast, Jeremy Ward, right?
Jeremy Ward, yes.
Yeah. And his grandpa was a captain out here.
Yeah.
And I've got a great photo of him, and then his grandpa, or his great-grandpa, and then his grandpa grew up here as the son of a guard and grew up on the prison grounds, and his name's Bob, and I'm planning on having both of them come in and talk to me a little bit more about his job and how it's evolved in the 2 years since I've interviewed him. And
Jeremy Ward's another one of those prime examples. He's not built like me. He's not a very big guy, but he's one of my top officers. He's really great. Is.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a good communicator, hard worker. He's on that schedule. You don't worry about where he's going that day. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Now, can you talk about the recent changes, the improvements to pay and benefits that have occurred?
Okay, let's go back to when I started.
Oh, yeah.
When I was going through my academy, my pay was nearly minimum wage.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was $3.65 an hour when I was in the academy, and the minimum wage back then I think was $3.35. Now I got a $2 an hour bump when I graduated from the academy, and I actually was placed full time off OJT. So that was a pretty good sized jump. But fast forward to today. Right now is the first time I have ever seen us on par with Ada County.
Yeah.
Ada County starts out with just a few cents higher an hour, but we have a signing bonus and a retention bonus that comes around annually now. And that I consider that a major, major accomplishment that we can now compete with our local jurisdiction. Like I talked about, laws are still enforced in the county jail. Mm-hmm. Some laws that include violence that we have to put ourselves in the middle of out there are not. Violence begets violence, when there, especially when there's no accountability behind it. Mm-hmm. And I want to go back to saying that that's a small group of our guys.
Right.
Just like Ada County jailers, they couldn't just close the doors when COVID hit. We couldn't either. I mean, a lot of the public are really not aware of what our staff do.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of the public just don't even know about us. Mm-hmm. They talked about essential workers. They were giving credit to your EMS, your firefighters, your teachers. They were giving credit to the people working in the grocery stores. They were giving credit to the people working in the convenience stores, which credit is due to all of them. And I think that they were all going to work during that time. But so were we. Yeah. And how often did you hear our names? When it came to the vaccinations, we did qualify early on, January of last year, but the offenders was really controversial around the United States. Do they even deserve it? That's what a lot of people are thinking. Well, whether you feel that way or not, they're in close quarters. Social distancing is difficult for them. We have to provide them all with masks. We have to enforce them wearing the mask. A lot of times they're in dormitory situations, and our staff that go home to their families every night work amongst them all day long.
Right.
I don't think a lot of people even gave that any consideration through all of this. In my opinion, they should have been amongst the first, right up with that vulnerable population to receive vaccines.
Yeah.
But we were amongst the last nationwide.
Right.
Not just here in
Oh,
Idaho,
yeah.
nationwide.
Absolutely.
Oregon-
Has it been administered to prisoners out there, the vaccine?
It has been now. Yeah, but we were even after the 12-year-olds were offered. So
Okay.
a lot of work and a lot of changes have gone into since COVID has come in.
Mm-hmm.
Cohorting is a big piece of it. What I mean by cohorting is that only the same group of offenders ever have contact with the same group of offenders, and you try and do that with the same staff working with those offenders too. So if you have contact tracing that goes, you try to limit it to one cohort as much as possible if there is somebody contracted COVID in that group.
Yeah.
The dormitories, I mean, that's just difficult to have small groups of cohorting in there. And with staffing shortages, it's not always possible to cohort your staff. It'd be great if we had a facility that had lots of flexibility in the beds, what they call wet cells. You know what I mean by wet cells?
I don't.
Okay, so you've got your dormitories, you got your cell units, and in your cell units you got dry cells and you got wet cells. So like Unit 13 out at ISCI, they're all dry cells. It means they have gang bathrooms, and that's just a plumbing terminology.
Yeah, okay.
That means they have multiple showers, multiple toilets and stuff down in the bathroom. They all come out of their cell and go down to the bathroom.
Okay.
They typically have control of their door.
Gotcha.
Wet cell, you close it, you lock it up. They have their bathroom and their sink and everything in there.
Gotcha.
Utility port, you can hand food into them.
Okay.
And so then you can truly isolate those in the cells. But in a dry cell, I mean, it's no different than a dormitory. You have to let them out and go to the bathroom, and now they're all mixing.
Right.
So south of town, I'm like the only facility that has general population with wet cells outside of maximum security institution.
Yeah.
You take a look at our mass testing, it shows that, the maximum security institution did really well keeping it isolated over there, but they do have those wet cells, and nobody is in a dormitory situation over there. So it works really well if you have that capability. Because I'm one of the only facilities that has those wet cells that can be isolated, I became the statewide COVID facility.
Gotcha.
An offender come up COVID in Kootenai County Jail, he put in a vehicle and brought to me. There was even some times that we did receiving diagnostic in our facility, and we're not a receiving diagnostic unit. We brought in a group from RDU and from Ada County, and we had to create our own RDU. Not staffed for it. We're short-staffed in the first place.
Yeah.
So it was my operations sergeant was in there. I think I had one floor officer, one R&E officer, response and escort. Myself, my captain, and my deputy warden. We're in there for that. A fight breaks out. And so here I am in clothes dressed like this,
right.
And I'm breaking up a fight.
Oh, my God.
And so, I mean, a lot of us have had to make a lot of changes this past year. There's been times that, I've gone in worked as an officer this past year, and so has a lot of the other administrators.
Yeah.
All the way up to my chief and deputy chief, and they've come in and assisted as well at different times during this staffing crisis, and then COVID, and we've experienced some pretty extreme shortages. So these raises and these new benefits that you're seeing, the retention benefits. Big win for us.
Yeah,
Big win.
yeah.
And what we've noticed since the introduction of that is almost every week our amount of applications are doubling.
Okay, that's what
so
I was
it's really helping.
Beneficial.
And I heard on the way here, I heard an advertisement for Snake River Correctional Facility, which they do start us out as more.
Yeah.
We are a right-to-work state. They are not.
Yeah.
And so their department is unionized. And so much of what happens with employees and protocols and everything in the correctional facilities is union controlled.
Yeah.
The union plays a lot of interference with what the administrators do there. And so as a result, the environment is not as desirable. I've got a lot of friends that work over there, and they tell me, the work conditions really, really suck, but the money kind of makes up for it. you know.
That's.
I've never felt that money was so badly needed I'd go to a bad work environment. So the one thing we can offer is a better work environment here, and not controlled by people that are not that should not be in the prison business.
Right.
So. You asked me about the programs earlier.
Yeah.
And I mentioned the mentor program. I've always said I do not think there is a magic bullet out there to fix people. I don't think there's any one magic bullet. What works for this person here may not work for this person.
Yeah.
And you have to find things for everybody. And so what I tried to do as a warden, and this is pretty much pre-COVID because a lot of this had to stop, is I tried to find so many different options, different things they could do, whether it be through, a music program, through, I mentioned like the debate team, the creative writing. And I don't remember the name that they changed it to, but we even had a drama class. They didn't like the name drama.
Yeah.
We had, I think it was a high school drama teacher came out, and they put on a play, and but they didn't like the name drama, so they changed the name from drama to something else, which is really a drama class. Chess club, and another thing, and you may have noticed this when you went through your tour. Very ironically, that this was something I presented at a nationwide wardens conference. Is here a couple years ago, I had my administrative support manager buy me 450 plants in what appeared to be terracotta, but they were plastic.
Yeah.
Just 450 plants. I distributed them through the tiers. And as you walk through the corridors out there, you saw like some rubber plants and stuff in the halls and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The idea is to make that look so less sterile,
Right.
make it more, like what you would want to see in the community or maybe in your own home.
Right.
Colors and, things like that. And when I presented this at the wardens, I showed pictures of all the plants on the tiers and stuff like that. You see all the wardens from the rest of the states, their jaws like open up. They're not hitting each other over the head with it. They're... What are they hiding stuff in it?
Yeah.
How much damage have they done with that? Or are they throwing it around? Are they breaking it? And they were shocked.
Yeah.
They were shocked that I did that, and I haven't had a single problem. Wow. They found it something to take care of.
Right.
Some of them even named it. There's a couple of units. They've got it growing all around the walls, around the windows, and everything. And it's just there's one unit that looks like like an Amazon rainforest to how much it's grown down there. Jeez. And so it just adds a little bit of color, life, and normalcy to the unit. There's units that we've taken, and I got to give credit to Randy Blades. He's the one that did this. I came in one day and found my coffee table out of my office was gone as a deputy warden. Well, he put it on a tier with some couches. I was skeptical. I thought those couches wouldn't last a month. They're still out there, years later.
Yeah.
And they take care of them. They do a mandatory cleaning them every now and then. They've knitted Afghans for them, and they got that coffee table. They have it scooted far enough away from the coffee table that nobody can put their feet up on the coffee table. Coffee table still looks nice.
Wow.
It's got magazines spread out on it. They all sit around. And when you'd walk the tiers before, it's a different conversation than if you go in and you sit down on that couch and talk to them.
Yeah,
it's like walking to the coffee shop and talking to somebody. So I nicknamed it Blades Bistro.
It's amazing just the little changes within the environment that can improve the morale.
We got one group, but we started American Legion Post 201 out there.
Yeah.
Put a flagpole out in the activities yard, which is pretty rare you see in a correctional facility because they have ropes. But this one is telescoping and locking. And so they have a honor guard, and the honor guard participates in a lot of the graduations we have for GEDs. I always try to get a good speaker to come out. For instance, our last one was David Leroy. Did a tremendous job. I've had President Trump out there. Not President Trump. President Trump. From
Yeah. I was like, wait, what? No. Wow.
But they always come out and they do a great job. They always talk about what honor it is. They're taken aback when they find out about our educational programs out there and how much they've accomplished. And sometimes we'll have guys in their 50s or 60s that are just now getting their GED and they've never accomplished that before. there's so many different things that we do out there that I really wish we could get back to, because that was like the win you'd always feel that would revitalize you.
Yeah.
We had the ADAPI program that, we had the canines out there that they were basically trained to be good pets for the Humane Society. Humane Society has suffered a lot of problems throughout this too, but one of the good things is that a lot of people adopted during this time because they were home, and they just not have had the canines to give us back since then, and to put the program back into play. We've had a meeting and we're talking about possibly doing a rehab program out there for some dogs that need to go through some rehabilitation, because we've got some pretty knowledgeable trainers out there with canine.
Yeah.
And they'd pay to do it if they could,
Yeah.
They really enjoy it. They missed the dogs being out there. Dogs had like a calming effect on the tier.
Oh, absolutely.
You walk a dog on a tier and it just seems to bring down the tension.
Yeah. I was lucky to tour a couple of years ago ISCI and see the dog training, and it was such a strange thing to walk in, through these very sterile feeling cell houses, and then to come to this one and this dog comes up and greets me, and and I'm just kind of chatting with prisoners and just seeing the joy on their face, and just like, wow.
Those American Legionnaires, throughout this COVID, they were the ones that volunteered. They stepped up to do a lot of the cleaning. They spray what's called Preventex once a month throughout the facility. They set up a mask making area. Yeah. They made over 15,000 masks for state employees, for vendors, for schools. A couple different school districts they provided masks for. They made a lot of gowns. They keep track of the hours that they put in. They run very, very formalized, very professional meetings. They take it very serious. They feel as if they're giving back to the community. Yeah. And it will revitalize a lot of their hope that they had lost in the past, to be able to do some things like that. Yeah. You find something that a guy can pour himself into, that's the best thing you can do, rather than have idle hands. Saying, there's an old saying, I don't remember what it is, idle hands is the devil's tool or something along that line. But the more things you can find that somebody can get involved with, you're not going to have one program that everybody's going to join. You got to find all kinds of different, opportunities for them.
Yeah, so. we would love to do as much as we can out here at the old pen to contribute to some of these programs. So if you have, we were meeting about having some hobbycraft items sold out here, made by the residents out there, and anything along those lines, we would love to contribute.
Yeah. So there was one tier that was considered to be a problematic tier in one of the units, and in the past it had earned the name as Gladiator School.
Yeah.
And, so I wanted to change that culture in there, and so one of the things I did is I took all the day room tables out, and had maintenance go down and put down epoxy finishes on them. These epoxy finishes made them look more like, and maybe not granite, but more of a residential type of table, even though it's the steel table. Reinstalled them, put some couches in there, put some cabinets in there that they can lock their hobbycraft in, and I allowed them to order non-traditional hobbycraft type items. Yeah. We were getting to the point where we were going to do some leather work and some other things like the model building and things along that line, and then COVID hit, and it kind of changed our population mix all over. But that unit actually became very well behaved, and we did that work through incentives. The ones that were the bad actors were no longer allowed to live in there, and some of the other bad actors on the other tiers decided they wanted to live over there and became less of bad actors. So, that kind of goes back to is we need to create more and more of this good to decrease the bad. But we're still always going to have that bad.
Well, I'm really hoping, with this improvement in the benefits and pay for officers, as you're getting all these folks applying and joining your staff, that hopefully you can bring those things back into force, and hopefully COVID will be yesterday's problem. And
I believe Liz Neville at the Women's Correctional East
yes.
Boise.
Yeah.
She's been the one that selected to replace me. I'm very excited for her.
That's right.
She's wonderful with people, you know, and I think she'll be able to bridge that communication gap that I was never able to master. She's really a very strong advocate for staff.
Yeah.
And I wish her well there. I've still got the rest of this week and a couple days next week to spend with her. I've known her since she was a brand new officer. She started for me at the Maximum Security Institution close to 17 years ago. Yeah. She's been terrific, and so I'm real happy for the facility I'm leaving that they got her. Yeah. I think it's a big win for the facility. That's and I wish her the best, and I keep telling her she can call on me anytime she needs, and we've always made jokes that I'm her work father.
Yeah, that's important to have, though. A good mentor. Oh my gosh, you can go a long way with that. Yeah. Well, I think you've shared an hour and a half of your time with me already. Is there anything else that you think that the public should know about corrections in Idaho, and what makes the Idaho Department of Corrections unique amongst the country? And you've been in this career, you've seen so many different transitions. Like, what do you think the public should know?
Well, I think when it comes to Department of Corrections here in Idaho, one, I talked about our safety record. Mm-hmm. Number two, I think we're probably, even though we're in Idaho, a fairly small state considered to the rest, I think we're extremely progressive in our facilities. I can tell you that our leadership that we have right now, they are probably more open to new ideas and new programs and anything, that we can do to increase that good that I'm talking about. Yeah. And we've got some absolute great leadership. It would be bad if I did not mention Josh Tewalt, our director right now, that he has, in his time as a director, he's increased the wages much more than I have seen any other director gain increases for us. He's been the conductor behind this entire orchestration, going clear back to when even Kevin Kemp was the director. And I can tell you that every director I've had has always brought something to the table. May not be the same as the next director, but they all kind of bring a specialty to the table. And I think Josh Tewalt has put a great team together, and I think there's some good things for the future for our department, even though I believe our department is one of the better run departments in the country. Because I have spent time with lots of other states and compare notes, talk about how they're doing, how we're doing. I think we're very unknown, but we're there. We have to be there. And our staff don't care about the recognition. Right. It doesn't matter. We'll be there. We'll be there whether we're known or not. And the work, the long weekend, working through the weekends, the holidays, the evenings, that's all done to keep our community safe.
Mm-hmm. So much respect for all the officers out there, and especially during this last year. Wow.
Very difficult last year, last 18 months. Yeah. It's been very, very difficult on the staff. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, it's your last week. Do you have any big plans for retirement?
Well, I would like to make up that marriage that I missed last year. And how optimistic I am. In my retirement paperwork, I filed married, filing jointly. So I better get married. But I'm building a new home. I bought some acreage, and I'm building a new home out there. I'm looking forward to that. I've got a real estate license, and I plan on selling some real estate. Got a couple dogs I just love playing with all the time, and so I do that every day. I like to, continue having that part of my daily routine to spend time with the dogs. As a matter of fact, I posted a video on Facebook over the weekend where the two dogs and myself were walking across this bridge over the creek, and said, "My new job, walking the dogs." Got a lot of comments about that, say, "Great job."
Nice. That is a great
So I enjoy doing some of the work that I've been doing, developing my ground. Like I bought excavation equipment. I'm doing a lot of that. So I might do a little bit of that. But, I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure, and I'm not that worried about it. That I have to do something next. But I do have some trips planned. Yeah. Going to Canada, going to for Thanksgiving, going to Mexico for Christmas, going to Vegas for New Year's, and hopefully one of those places will tie the knot.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to the trips finally getting out of town since all of this started.
Well deserved. Yeah. Yeah. Well, congratulations on your retirement, and thank you for all the years of dedicated work you've done for the
It's
state
been a pleasure.
Idaho.
It's been a pleasure. It really has been.
Well, we always end with a little saying. If I were to say, do your own time, how would you respond to that?
Do your own time goes back to what I was talking about, respect.
Respect, yeah.
And the do your own time means let me do it without your interference from you. And those bad players I talk about, they're incapable of that, They have to interfere with other people's time. But there are some people out there that, what do your own time means, and they do their own time. So, but yeah, it goes back to that respect thing.
That's great. All right, everybody. Do your own time, do your own number, and we will talk to you next week.
If you enjoyed Behind Gray Walls, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Not only do we get to hear your feedback about the show, but it helps others find us as well. If you're interested in finding out more about the podcast, follow our Facebook group at Behind Gray Walls Podcast. We have a podcast Instagram as well. You can find us on Instagram at Behind Gray Walls Pod.